the article freedom. Now, this is quite a long article, Baal Hasulam's freedom article. It's a long one, but it's definitely one that we should be studying. The internet, the link for the article should be given to you. You probably got it in your email. And if you have any queries, questions, you could always send them to us on YouTube. We'll try to answer them as best we can. But like I said, this is going to be a long one, and it'll probably take us a few weeks to get through it, given the situation. All right, in case there are any questions, shoot them through. Once again, Baal Hasulam's article, The Freedom. It's very important to understand human nature. It's very important for us to understand where actually our choices, how we make decisions in life, where actually are we free. It's really important for us to understand that, because without really having a clear understanding of that, we can't really make proper judgments. And this article will give us a lot of insight, and we'll discover and see whether we're really free or not. So let's start reading, start learning from the Kabbalists themselves. And let's go. The freedom. Charut, carved on the tables. Do not pronounce it charut, carved, but rather cherut, freedom, to show that they are liberated from the angel of death. Now, Baal Hasulam is taking obviously a piece from a text which is a long time ago, but he wants to explain a thing for us. He took something from Kabbalistic sources that were like written ages ago. This is from the Midrash. And what he wants to do is actually explain to us what Kabbalists were talking about hundreds and maybe even thousands of years ago when they were talking about spirituality. And are the same concepts still valid for our generation? The same concepts, they'll always be valid because laws of nature do not change. So as far as our development is concerned and how the world works, this is never going to change. These are fixed laws of nature. But he wants to give us, a bit of insight as to the topic, and that this was talked about hundreds and thousands of years even before, during the times of Abraham as well. As you know, the wisdom of Kabbalah comes from Adam. So every Kabbalist has, pondered upon this topic of freedom. Where are we actually free? These words need to be clarified, because how is the matter of reception of the Torah relates to one's liberation from death? Now, the reception of Torah is attaining spirituality. Obviously, we're not talking about a paper book that's fallen out of the sky. Torah means to attain the level of the Creator. It's actually the light. Torah means light. And the reception of the Torah means revelation of the Creator. And how could that free us from death? So obviously there must be a higher level of consciousness that he's talking about, which we'll discover later. And that should able to give us a perception of life that is beyond our corporeal existence. Furthermore, once they've attained an eternal body that cannot die through the reception of the Torah, through the attainment of spirituality, that is, how did they lose it again? Can the eternal become absent, or can the eternal be lost? Well, let's see and find out. Freedom of will. So this is the subtitle. To understand the sublime concept, freedom from the angel of death, we must first understand the concept of freedom as it is normally understood by all of humanity. It's the general view that freedom is deemed a natural law, which applies to all of life. Thus, we see that animals that fall into captivity die when we rob them of their freedom. This is a true testimony that providence does not accept the enslavement of any creature. It is with good reason that humanity has been struggling for the past several hundred years to obtain a certain measure of freedom of the individual. Yet this concept expressed in that word, freedom, remains unclear. And if we delve into the meaning of that word, there will be almost nothing left. For before you seek the freedom of the individual, you must assume that any individual in and of itself has that quality called freedom, meaning that one can act according to one's own free choice. So it's a hot topic for hundreds of years. If you think about all the phases that humanity has gone through, from slavery through all the Middle Ages until we, came across democracy, and how we got to democracy, and how fascism developed, communism developed, all these things developed throughout our history. We've just been trying to find a way to be free. So humanity for centuries is it's like the snowball, constantly rolling down the hill, and the problem is always getting bigger. Why? Because we want to understand, we want to become free. It's in our nature to be free. And in the 21st century, you can still see, even now, people on the streets all over the world, as you can see with the events in the US, people do not feel like they're free. People feel like they're in chains. So this concept of freedom is really unclear for us. In what are we free? We're born in a society, we live in this world, nobody asked us if we even want to be here. So all of a sudden we end up here, we have to live here. We are born, we live, and we die, and it's like, well, we've got nothing to say in that matter. So this idea of freedom is really blurry, because if you don't have the freedom to actually, of your own free will, to exist, then, what are all the details in between? He's going to delve into that later. Let's go into the next subtitle, pleasure and pain. So in order for us to discover why we're always seeking freedom, he wants to now give us two principles, pleasure and pain, because he wants to talk about our nature. And let's see what he tells us about our nature. However, when we examine the acts of an individual, we shall find them compulsory. He is compelled to do them and has no freedom of choice. In a sense, he's like a stew cooking on a stove. It has no choice but to cook. And it must cook because Providence has harnessed life with two chains, pleasure and pain. The living creatures have no freedom of choice to choose pain or reject pleasure. And man's advantage over animals is that he can aim at a remote goal, meaning to agree to a certain amount of current pain out of choice of future benefit or pleasure to be attained after some time. But in fact, there is no more than a seemingly commercial calculation here, where the future benefit or pleasure seems preferable and advantageous to the agony they're suffering from the pain they've agreed to assume presently. There is only a matter of deduction here, that they deduct the pain and suffering from the anticipated pleasure, and there remains some surplus. Thus only the pleasure is extended, and so it sometimes happens that we are tormented because we did not find the attained pleasure to be the surplus we had hoped for, compared to the agony we suffered. Hence, we are in deficit just as merchants. And when all is said and done, there is no difference here between man and animal. And if that is the case, there's no free choice whatsoever, but a pulling force, drawing them towards any bypassing pleasure and rejecting them from painful circumstances. And Providence leads them to every place it chooses by means of these two forces, without asking their opinion in the matter. Moreover, even determining the type of pleasure and benefit are entirely out of one's own free choice, but follow the will of others as they want and not he. For example, I sit, I dress, I speak, and I eat. I do all these not because I want to sit that way or talk that way, or dress that way or eat that way, but because others want me to sit, dress, talk, and eat that way. It all follows the desire and fancy of society, not my own free will. Furthermore, in most cases, I do all these against my will, for I would be a lot more comfortable behaving simply without any burden. But I am chained with iron shackles in all my movements to the fancies and manners of others which make up the society. So you tell me, where is my freedom of will? On the other hand, if we assume that the will has no freedom, then we're all like machines, operating and creating through external forces which force them to act this way. This means that we're all incarcerated in the prison of providence, which, using these two chains, pleasure and pain, pushes and pulls us to its will, to where it sees fit. It turns out that there is no such thing as selfishness in the world, since no one here is free or stands on his own 2 feet. I'm not the owner of the act, and I'm not the performer because I want to perform, but I am performed upon in a compulsory manner and without any awareness. Thus, reward and punishment become extinct. And it is quite odd, not only for the Orthodox who believe in his providence and can rely on him and trust that he aims only for the best in this conduct. It is even stranger for those who believe in nature, since according to the above, we're all incarcerated by the chains of blind nature. Excuse me. With no awareness of accountability. And we, the chosen species, with reason and knowledge, have become a toy in the hands of blind nature, which leads us astray, and who knows where. All right, so this paragraph requires a bit of explanation. Now, you can also relate this to the previous article we studied last week about the body and the soul. Now, this part, pleasure and pain, is describing human nature. We're like animals. We run towards pleasure and we run away from pain, just like animals do. And what makes humans a little bit more different than animals is we can have a calculation for the future. We can calculate something for a future benefit. So let's say I'm willing to study university for 4 years or 5 years or whatever to obtain a profession. So I'm actually taking on suffering, hard work, stress, and so forth in order to get a diploma so that I can be, I don't know, a lawyer or accountant or an engineer or doctor, whatever. So I'm going through years of suffering because I expect the future outcome to be a benefit for me in the long run. Right? So this is a kind of calculation we can do, but animals cannot. And if things don't add up as we planned, obviously our suffering is great because we do 4 or 5 years of, I don't know, education, we get a degree, and well, we go into that career and discover that we don't really want to do that. And how did we make that choice? Well, we made that choice according to what he's explaining here, according to the society, because they told us that these careers were good. You could make a good life out of it, or you could, you can do things and, make money, look after yourself, have a good life with this stuff. So we go into them. Why? Is it because I really wanted it? No. It's because the society gave me the impression that these were good things. So I jumped on the bandwagon, made a career for myself, and then later discovered that this career isn't really what I want to do. And so I wasted a lot of time, years, and effort trying to, become something which I didn't want in the first place. So as you can see, there's pleasure and pain according to our nature. Then we make this calculation of what we think is going to be good. And even that calculation is based on how the society, educated me, or how the society gave me desires. Like you said here, I eat, I sit, I dress according to the society, which is actually true. We can't go out into society, under normal circumstances according to how we want. There's a norm. You can't go to the office, I don't know, wearing shorts and flip-flops, maybe you can, okay, but let's say we're talking about going and working in an official office or somewhere, okay, so there are norms that you have to follow, and so society really shapes how I behave. So humanity isn't really free at all when you look at these things, and all we do, therefore, like in the previous article of last week, Body and Soul, if we look at ourselves, we're just like a protein, a bag of protein, which is actually a machine. So all our decision-making process is based on pain and pleasure. It's our software, and this software is running this hardware called body, and I'm just making calculations to see where I can get more pleasure. Well, if that's how I function by nature, where am I exactly free? And this is why he ends the articles, that paragraph, the subheading, say, well, looks like we're all toys in the hands of nature. This is how our nature works. And that's it. It's nothing to talk about. So let's read a bit more and try to understand these things in a bit more detail. These are very important for us to understand, because as students of the wisdom of Kabbalah, what we want to do is to discern where the freedom of choice is, because that's going to be really important for our spiritual advancement, where I can choose freely without my nature interfering, so that I can actually advance in spirituality. The law of causality. It's worthwhile taking some time to grasp such an important thing, meaning how we exist in the world as beings with a self, where each of us regards himself a unique entity, acting on its own, independent of external, alien, and unknown forces, and does this being the self appear to us. It is true that there is a general connection among all the elements of reality before us, which abide by the law of causality, by way of cause and effect, moving forward. And as a whole, so is each item for itself, meaning that each and every creature in the world, from the four types, still, vegetative, animate, and speaking, abides by the law of causality, by way of cause and effect. Moreover, each particular form of a particular behavior, which a creature follows while in this world, is pushed by ancient causes, compelling it to accept that change in that behavior and not another whatsoever. And this is apparent to all who examine the ways of nature from a pure scientific point of view and without a shred of bias. Indeed, we must analyze this matter to allow ourselves to examine it from all sides. So the law of causality is also an important thing that we need to understand. Why do we need to understand that? Well, because we all consider ourselves as a unique being. Okay, so we always say to ourselves, well, me, I did this, I thought, I want, I did, and so forth. And because everybody considers themselves as a specific entity, it doesn't really relate to the outside cause being his reason for behavior. So the law of causality is very important, because at the end of the day, a person is working through two factors. One, from these inherent things that are embedded in us through our genetics, through our parents, forefathers, all these hormones and stuff that we get through from nature, and the accumulation of all the generations, actually, because each generation is the result of the accumulation of all the previous generations. So a newborn baby at this moment is standing upon everything that humanity created for all these thousands of years. So on the one hand, we are born with this accumulation of humanity inside of us genetically as well, instinctively genetically. And on the other hand, we're constantly in the hands of nature, which we have no control over. So nature is also impacting us. So there's always this cause and consequence, which we are just being influenced by, and we're not part of. And we don't have anything to do with it, because we don't decide who our parents are going to be. We don't decide where we're born. So if you look at the whole procedure, you could be born anywhere. You could be a prince in one country, and you could be a poor kid dying from hunger on the other side of the planet. And all of this seems ad hoc, random. It's just like no plan. So we're constantly under this cause and consequence, which is affecting us internally and externally, and that's ruling and governing our lives. So it's very important for us to understand from both perspectives that everything inside of us is actually a cause and consequence. So we're kind of like the software working inside of us. And secondly, we're also being impacted, affected from outside environmental factors, and we're like in between. And at the end of the day, we're in between these two forces, and the person has no choice. He's simply being tossed around. So this is important, because internal and external forces are influencing us. And this is how we see the world. So he's going to describe that to us in more detail at the moment. So let's see what he's talking about here. This next subtitle, 4 factors. In the meantime, are there any questions? Okay, before we move on, we've got Francesco Di Santo. He's asking, if there's no freedom, there's no judgment as per last session, body and soul. If I make action or bad thought, when that action or thought produces suffering, is that distraction or correction? Well, there's also the question of, is that thought or desire or intention, you're doing in the first place? That's also a question mark, Francesco. So if I'm seemingly running on this software called pain and pleasure, and my body is just calculating where I can get more pleasure and less suffering, and all my calculation is based on that for the present and the future ahead, then where am I actually going through that procedure? So all the actions and the bad thoughts and everything else that comes to me, I can't really say it's me either, because at the end of the day, we are a desire to receive pleasure. We want to be pleased. We want to feel pleasure in our lives. So anything that relates to that, can I really say that's mine? It's my thought. It's my bad action. We can't. There's nothing really we can attribute to ourselves at all. Which is what he explained to us. He said, "Listen, we are like machines." A protein machine, and that's it. So he's going to explain how that works as well. I touched on it a little bit as well, but now I touched on it on the previous subheading, the law of causality. But if you think about it, when he describes the situation to us in more detail, we're going to discover that, well, we never had a chance of a choice in anything. So he's still going to explain that to us. Is it our soul that guides our causes and effects of our body, our habits, the environment, etc.? Well, we don't have a soul yet. Okay, so we're endeavoring to build one. That's what spirituality is all about. Spirituality means I build my higher level of consciousness, and that's what a soul is. So if we already had a soul, we wouldn't have a problem, because we'd already be at a high level of consciousness, and we wouldn't have any corporeal problems at all, because we'd understand cause and consequence. And because we don't understand cause and consequence, humanity is in a big mess. So this we have to still delve into. About the environment, it's a little early to talk about the environment right now, simply because he's going to talk about it in a minute. So let's read the 4 factors and let's see where Baal Hasulam takes us. Bear in mind that every emergence occurring in the beings of the world must be perceived not as extending existence from absence, but as existence from existence. through an actual entity that has shed its previous form and has robed its current one. Therefore, we must understand that in every emergence in the world, there are four factors, where from the four of them together arises that emergence. They are called by the names A, the source, B, the unchanging conduct of cause and effect relating to the source's own attribute, C, its internal conducts of cause and effect, which change by contact with alien forces, D, the conducts of cause and effect of alien things which affect it from the outside, and I will clarify them one at a time. So this is once again, he's saying, well, everything comes from these four factors. And let's go into detail and see how everything sits into place. The first reason, the source. So he's going to define what each of them are, and he'll explain them to us. The first reason, the source, the first matter. The source is the first matter related to that being, for there is nothing new under the sun, and anything that happens in our world is not existence from absence, but existence from existence. It is an entity that has stripped off its former shape and taken on another form, different from the first, and that entity, which shed its previous form, is defined as the source. In it lies the potential destined to be revealed and determined at the end of formation of that emergence. Therefore, it's clearly considered its primary cause. So in everything, the first thing is the source. It's like the seed of everything. Everything starts with an initial point, a seed, a drop of sperm, a thought, anything. And that's the first reason. The second reason, cause and effect, that stems from itself. This is a conduct of cause and effect related to the source's own attribute and which is unchanging. Take, for example, a stalk of wheat that has rotted in the ground and arrived at the state of sowing many stalks of wheat. Thus, that rotten state is deemed the source, meaning that the essence of the wheat has stripped off its former shape, called the source, which has no shape at all. Now, after rotting in the ground, it has become fit for robing another form, the form of many stalks of wheat intended to emerge from that source, which is the seed. It is known to all that this source is destined to become neither cereal nor oats, but only equalize with its former shape, which has left it being the single stalk of wheat. And although it changes to a certain degree in quality and quantity, for in the former shape it was a single stalk, and now there are 10 stalks, and in taste and appearance too, the essence of the shape of the wheat remains unchanged. Thus there's a conduct of cause and effect here ascribed to the source's own attribute, which never changes. Thus cereal will never emerge from wheat, as we've said, and this is called the second reason. So here, the second reason, cause and effect, that stem from itself. Basically here, everything in nature stems from its source. Everything, the still, vegetative, animate, speaking, all of us. So, a lion is not going to give birth to a zebra. Okay, it's not going to happen. So under natural circumstances anyway. So whatever the seed is, that's how it's going to grow. So wheat is going to be wheat, corn is going to be corn. This is not going to change. In the seed of everything, there's that information that develops it and grows it according to the particular of that thing. So in this case, he gave us the wheat example. So from a seed, that rots in the ground, you'll only get wheat. But that little seed has all the information related to that source. So inside that seed contains all the information that's required for its full development. Third reason is internal cause and effect. This is the conduct of the internal cause and effect of the source, which change upon encountering the alien forces in its environment. Thus we find that from one stalk of wheat, which rots in the ground, many stalks emerge, sometimes larger and better wheat than prior to sowing. Therefore, there must be additional factors involved here, collaborating and connecting with the force concealed in the environment, meaning the source. And because of that, the additions in quality and quantity, which were absent in the previous form of wheat, have now appeared. Those are the minerals and the materials in the ground, the rain and the sun. All these operate on it by administering from their forces and joining the force within the source itself. And through the conduct of cause and effect, they have produced the multiplicity in quality and quality in that emergence. Sorry, in quantity and quality in that emergence. We must understand that this third factor joins with the internality of the source, since the force hidden in the source controls them. In the end, all these changes belong to the wheat and to no other plant. Hence, we define them as internal factors. However, they differ from the second factor, which is utterly unchanging, whereas the third factor changes in both quality and quantity. So the third factor, this internal cause and effect, basically it's saying that there are factors that affect us from the environment, which doesn't change our essence, but it changes how our essence grows in quality and quantity. So it has a qualitative and a quantitative impact on the person or on the seed or on the animal. It doesn't matter what. Anything that has environmental factors that influence that source will obviously create an impact in that source. It won't make any changes in the source, but what it will do, it will influence the quality of it or the quantity of it. So a wheat is still a wheat, that's not going to change. But if it's in a good environment, if you planted it in a nice place where there are minerals and there's enough humidity and sun, you're obviously going to get better crops. So he's saying that although the wheat is not going to change, if the environment is good, the quality and the quantity is going to be affected. And if the environment is bad, so if you plant it in a desert, obviously that's not going to work out for you. So the internal cause and effect means that there are certain factors from the environment that affect how I develop or how that seed develops. Let's also read the fourth reason, cause and effect through alien things. This is a conduct of cause and effect of alien things that act upon it from the outside. In other words, they have no direct relation to the wheat, like minerals, rain, or sun, but are alien to it, such as nearby things or external events such as hail, wind, etc. And you find that four factors combine to the wheat throughout its growth. Each particular state that the wheat is subject to during that time becomes conditioned on the four of them. And the quality and quantity of each state is determined by them. And as we have portrayed in the wheat, so is the rule in every emergence in the world, even in thoughts and ideas. If, for example, we picture for ourselves some conceptual state in a certain individual, such as a state of a person being religious or non-religious or an extreme Orthodox or not so extreme or midway will understand that state is determined in that person by the above 4 factors. So the last one, the 4th reason, is cause and effect through alien things. This means that there are certain things in life that do not directly influence the seed's development with respect to its source, but does impact its existence. So in terms of developing, in a quantitative or qualitative way, it's not influencing me. But let's say, I don't know, we have, let's say, a land where there's all wheat, and all of a sudden a truck just rolls in there. So the truck rolling into the wheat, to the land, into the crops, doesn't really have an impact on its development. But what it has happened is now just wrecked all the crop. So it doesn't have a direct relation to the source. There's no direct relationship to the source, but there is an indirect relation to its existence. So, for example, also when we fall sick, or sometimes people die of heart attacks or cancer, or, right now I've got the coronavirus running around. So it doesn't really impact us in the way that we develop qualitatively or quantitatively, but it does have an impact on our lives because it does kill us, or it can kill us actually. So these things are external factors which don't have a direct impact on our qualitative or quantitative development. However, they do have an impact on our existence. And everything in life is carved around these 4 factors. So all our lives, everything we desire, we think, we want to do, everything that happens to us is all based on these 4 factors. Let's see if there's another question here. During the study of Kabbalah, we change our internal attitude. How can the light change us considering our internal program? Well, our internal program is not going to change, because in the article it says as well, we can't change our source. We are created as it is. We are a desire to receive pleasure. So this is not going to change. This is how our nature is. So in the wisdom of Kabbalah, what we endeavor to do is to use it correctly so that we can get pleasure. Because in corporeality, you can't really get pleasure, because the desire to receive something, the desire to receive any pleasure, when it meets the pleasure, when a desire is fulfilled with the pleasure, they cancel each other out. This is why humanity is always running around trying to fulfill new desires. Because if I get what I want, the desire and the pleasure cancel each other out. So there's no way for humanity to really be happy in that situation. So there's nothing to change there. What we want to do is to change how we use our nature. Sometimes in Kabbalistic books, it talks about changing our nature, but it's actually changing the use of our nature. We will always be a desire to receive pleasure. That's going to remain. But to really use it correctly in a proper way where we can get pleasure, that's the whole trick. And that's what we endeavor to do in the wisdom of Kabbalah. And that change will come to us as we study more and more. Francesco is asking, therefore the dot in the heart is an actual calling from above, or a cause and effect. Exactly, that's a really good example, because that's what, it's a good thing you mentioned that, because this is what he's talking about when he talks about the seed. He's going to explain that to us later. Baal Hasulam cunningly, very nicely, uses the example of a wheat as a seed which you plant in the soil somewhere. And he's going to make that relation to the dot in the heart later on down the line. So it's a good thing you mentioned that, and we'll see that down the line. So let's see how he explains to us all these step by step, all these cause and consequences, and how we develop. Hereditary possessions. The cause of the first reason is the source. which is its first substance. Man is created existence from existence, meaning from the minds of its progenitors. Thus, to a certain extent, it's like copying from book to book. This means that almost all the matters that were accepted and attained in the fathers and forefathers are copied here as well. So imagine all of us having hereditary past. And like I said a minute ago, when a child is born, he or she is an accumulation. He or she is the sum of the whole of humanity's development. So all of us actually, when we are first born, we're getting everything, not just from our parents, but from their parents and their parents and their parents. It's like going all the way back. So we're an accumulation. We're a result of that accumulation of development. But the difference is that they are in an abstract form, much like the sowed wheat, which is not fit for sowing until it has rotted and shed its former shape. So is the case with the drop of semen from which man is born. There's nothing in it of its forefathers' shapes, only abstract force. For the same ideas that were concepts in his forefathers have turned into mere tendencies in him, called instincts or habits, without even knowing why does what he does, why one does what he does. Indeed, they are hidden forces he had inherited from his ancestors, in a way that not only do the material possessions come to us through inheritance from our ancestors, but the spiritual possessions and all the concepts that our fathers engaged in also come to us by inheritance from generation to generation. And from here surface the manifold tendencies that we find in people, such as tendency to believe or to criticize, a tendency to settle for material life, or desiring only ideas, despising a life without aspirations, stingy, yielding, insolent, or shy. All these pictures that appear in people are not their own property, which they have acquired, but mere inheritance that had been given to them by their ancestors. It's known that there's a special place in the brain where these hereditaments reside. It's called medulla oblongata, the elongated brain, or subconscious, and all the tendencies appear there. But because the concepts of our ancestors, acquired through their experiences, have become mere tendencies in us, they are considered the same as the sowed wheat, which has taken off its former shape and remained bare, having only potential forces worthy of receiving new forms. In our matter, these tendencies will robe the forms of concepts. This is considered the first substance, and this is the primary factor called source. In it reside all the forces of the unique tendencies he had inherited from his progenitors, which are defined as ancestral heritage. Bear in mind that some of these tendencies come in a negative form, meaning the opposite of the ones that were in his ancestors. This is why they said, all that is concealed in the Father's heart emerges openly in the Son. The reason for it is that the source takes off its former shape in order to take on a new form. Hence, it's close to losing the shapes of the concepts of his ancestors. Like the wheat that rots in the ground loses the shape that existed in the wheat. However, it still depends on the other three factors. So this is really important for us to understand that everything that we think we are in our personality, character, in the way we think, in what we want, how we are, what our personalities, everything about us is basically hereditary. There's nothing we can say about ourselves, although we feel unique. There's nothing really we can say about ourselves that's unique, simply because everything we got from ancestral heritage. So every individual is the accumulation, the accumulated result of all our previous ancestors. This is why humanity is also smarter in every generation. And all of these are embedded in us, in our subconscious, in our habits, in our instinctive behavior, in our character, personality. These are all inside of us. So hereditary possessions already is what we are. And this is the first thing. So from that drop of semen that takes its place in the egg or in the mother's womb, everything is in there, is in terms of information. And whatever will be from that baby is just like a seed of wheat. So everything, all the information is already in that initial state. Ricardo is asking, are these tendencies coming from past life experiences of the self, or are these family karmic related? Well, all of these, like he says here, are from previous generations. So they're from our parents, parents of our parents, our grandparents, in other words, their parents and their parents and their parents and their parents. So if you think about the accumulated history of humanity, everything that exists in us is pretty much a result of that accumulation. So we can't really say anything karmic about it. It's just common sense, really. Because if humanity is always developing, going forward and forward and forward, then that advancement is becoming a part of that generation. And when the new generation is born, that new generation is standing on top of that developed level. So in other words, when we always say, you know, what do parents always say about their children? Wow, he's so smart. Why? Because he's smart, because he's coming with the accumulated experiences, the experiences and lives of all the previous generations. So yeah, he's definitely smarter than us because he has more inner source, he has more inner development, more ready, more, pretty much more smarter because of that accumulation factor. So this is the first thing, and it's embedded in everyone as the source. So this hereditary possession that we have is that seed from our father, but let's not be so shallow about it, because it's not just from our mom and dad, but all the previous generations. So it's a huge accumulation of all of human history inside of us. The second one after that, the next subtitle, is the influence of the environment. The second reason is an unchanging direct conduct of cause and effect related to the source's own attribute. Meaning, as we have clarified with the wheat that rots in the ground, the environment in which the source rests, such as soil, minerals, and rain, air, and the sun, affect the sowing by a long chain of cause and effect in a long and gradual process, state by state, until they ripen. And the source retakes its former shape, the shape of wheat, but differing in quality and quantity. In their general aspect, they remain completely unchanged. Hence, no cereal or oats will grow from it. But in their particular aspect, they change in quantity. They change in quantity, as from one stalk emerge a dozen or 2 dozen stalks, and in quality, as they're better or worse than the former shape of the wheat. It is the same here. man as a source is placed in an environment, meaning in society, and he is necessarily affected by it, as the wheat from its environment. For the source is but a raw form. Thus, through the constant contact with the environment and the society, he is gradually impressed by them through a change of consecutive states, one by one, as cause and effect. At that time, the tendencies included in his source are changed and take on the form of concepts. For example, if one inherits from his ancestors a tendency to stinginess, as he grows, he builds for himself concepts and ideas that conclude decisively that it's good for a person to be stingy. Thus, although his father was generous, he can inherit from him the negative tendency to be stingy, for the absence is just as inheritance as the presence. Or if one inherits from one's ancestors a tendency to be open-minded, he builds for himself ideas and draws from them conclusions that it is good for a person to be open-minded. But where does one find those sentences and reasons? One takes all that from his environment, unknowingly, for they impart to him their views and likings in the form of gradual cause and effect. Hence, man regards them as his own possession, which he acquired through his free thought. But here too, as with the wheat, there is one unchanging part of the source, which is that in the end, the tendencies he had inherited remain as they were in his forefathers. And this is called the second factor. So as you can see, we inherit everything from forefathers, and how they emerge inside of us in a positive or negative way depends only on the environment, which is the society that we live in. So here already, as you can see, if all my traits are coming from ancestral heritage, and then I'm placed in a society where those qualities are being influenced by the environment, there's actually no real place for me to move. There's no maneuver area here. I'm just a piece of clay in the hands of the potter. So it's very, it's quite enlightening. So it's quite deep as well when you look at it. So it turns out that we don't really have anything that we can really say that we're influencing. Everything that is happening in or outside of us is just beyond us. Okay, let's see if we have anything here. But all religions speak of punishment and sin because of bad habits. None speak of accumulated experience of generations. Are they wrong playing with people's lives? Well, the wisdom of Kabbalah doesn't really talk about religion. And there's nothing to talk about there at all. Because if everything we've got inside of us, all our character, all our traits, all our qualities are from our ancestral heritage, and then we're in this environment, we just get born in some environment, God knows which country, what culture, what religion, you just turn into the product of the environment. So how can you really say you can sin or even do a good thing? You can't sin and you can't do a precept. It's not possible, because there's nothing you can attribute to yourself. You've become a product of the environment. So the environment is influencing all our traits, which are from our ancestors. And pretty much according to that, according to the education, according to that culture, according to that environment, I'm making a calculation of pain and pleasure. So there's nothing really to talk about. There's nothing really to identify with myself. Seriously, we are just like clay in the hands of an artist. And that's how life is playing with us. And this is how we should take it. As we go more and more into this article, we'll find out. This is quite a long article. We'll end it here tonight with an hour lesson. It's good that you guys have questions as well. It's a good idea to go over the article if you have time during the week. We've stopped at habit turns to second nature. We'll continue from this subtitle tomorrow, not tomorrow, next week, I'm sorry. And then we'll see further and further as we delve into this article, how we're actually tied into these shackles, like he says before, how humanity is just like lost. One last question from Ricardo. So there's never a chaos condition operating on the external level forces, as all is defined from the source and the creator. Absolutely. From the side of the creator, there is no chaos. From the side of humanity, there's always chaos because we never understand what we're going through and why we're going through it. So from our perspective, life is always chaotic. It's always, giving us grief, problems. You can't sustain your happiness. Even if you can be happy, it's short-lived, and anything can happen anytime. So there's always this uncertainty, always this side to life where we can't make sense of it simply because we're not looking at life from a higher perspective. We're stuck in this animate life where we are born, we live, and we die. And because we're staying in this animate level of existence, we can't really find a way to get out of it. You can't really, teach a donkey to be a human being. And our situation is different. We want to teach humans how to be at a higher level of existence. So this is the whole wisdom of Kabbalah. And only when we exalt ourselves to that certain level can we really, really solve all our problems in the corporeal level, which we'll get to discuss that later as well. So today, we're going to end our lesson here. Habit turns to second nature is the subtitle we're going to continue from. And until next Tuesday, take care of yourselves. All the best. Have a good evening. Bye now.